All right, welcome. My name is Tracy Lundstrom. I am the owner of All Around Yoga and the creator of the Transitional Yoga program, where we go into the facilities and create a re-entry yoga program in Boulder County, Colorado. This CEC course is called Yoga for Incarcerated Women. It is a 5-part series, so we're going to cover different components of the training through each of the parts, and each of the parts will count for 1 hour of continuing education units that are accredited through Yoga Alliance. So there are a lot of different programs out there that offer yoga to juveniles, in the prison system, and in the jail systems. Each of them are going to have their own unique considerations. And so this one is particularly going to be focusing on the jail setting as well as the female population. So first I'd like to just cover over what is the entire 5-part series going to look like. All right, so the entire course breakdown. Part 1, which we'll be going over in this video, is more of an introduction, as well as taking a look at the experience in the institution. So what is the rhythm of the institution? So we can kind of think about maybe how that experience may be affecting the people that we are going in to serve. Part 2 is going to take a little bit of a closer look at the population. So it'll look at the demographics, trauma, stress, depression. So the measurements of kind of what's going on for the people that are in there prior to getting there. And then it's also going to look at some of the housing unit dynamics, because most of the jail systems are going to have different housing units, and they're going to have their own unique stressors and considerations. So that's what part 2 will look at. Part 3 is going to look at the research. What does the research already say about the benefits of yoga? And then part 4 is going to be applying all of those things, the experience of the institution, the demographics, the housing units, and what the research says, and putting it into how do we create that experience with yoga in the jail. And then part 5 is going to be looking at motivations for service, of exploring why do we do service, what motivates us. So all of those are going to put together that whole 5 CEU hour credit for the course. There'll be some online quizzes to be able to complete and get your certificate. But let's get moving on to that first part, the introduction, taking a look at the experience of the institution. All right, and then we're just going to break down this part 1 of the course. So first, we're going to take a little time to just kind of reflect. What are the things that we love having in our everyday life? What are our comforts? And contemplating what we might miss most if we found ourselves in a situation where we weren't allowed access to our normal lives. Then we'll take a look at the incarceration routine, the day-to-day of the jail. So the things like, what does the structure look like? Because you'll find that it's very different schedule than what many of us are used to in our lives, with our jobs, with our families and friends. The disruptions, the types of things that can cause more stress, more upset, and make it even more difficult than the situation already is. And then what is there to do when you are in the jail? Then we're going to take a few more consideration points of the experience of what people who are incarcerated, specifically in the jail setting, are kind of dealing with. And we'll take a look at how we can make yoga relatable to the people in the population. There will be an online quiz at the end that you can take to get the first hour of continuing education credit. When I do this training in person, we oftentimes kick the training off in a park or some kind of area, recreation area that allows people to see a lot of the beautiful sights. So things like, the sky and the clouds, the birds flying, or maybe trees, mountains, bodies of water, things like that. And we actually take some time quietly walking through the area, kind of contemplating our appreciation for some of these beauties that we get to experience whenever we want, right? So I put up some pictures here just to kind of think, what are some of your favorite? I guess I could have put a beach scene up there. That's one of my favorite ones. But, just contemplating, like, what are some of those nature experiences that make you feel really connected, okay? Other things, what about our home? Things like, our cozy bed. Maybe you have a pair of sheets that just feel perfect. Every time you slip into them, you audibly feel comfortable, feel embraced, feel hugged, feel safe. Maybe you have a space in your home with a little fireplace that just allows you to feel that sense of calm. Maybe you enjoy taking hot baths and just enjoy that experience of soaking in the warm water, hearing the water running, sometimes even just the sound of the anticipation of giving ourselves some of those little gifts and time to take care of ourselves. And, even this picture of having a cup of coffee while you're on the computer, like that's a very common thing that I do. It's my daily routine. Write email to my mom and have my cup of coffee, and it never gets old. So what are some of those comforts at home that you really appreciate? And contemplate, maybe thinking, how would it feel if you didn't have access to that? And even beyond that, like thinking about some of the more interactive things, or, technology, like going for a drive. Did you ever get that feeling where you want to go and drive up through the mountains, or, maybe going to a concert with friends and hearing your favorite band and feeling that energy, or, I know we give it all kinds of guff, our electronics, but like, how much would you miss your phone? If you really, like, you're in a situation where you're trying like crazy to connect to some of the people, you're feeling so disconnected and you don't have your normal devices or opportunities to be able to connect. So I'll ask you to pause this video and take 5 or 10 minutes. You can take as long as you want, honestly, but walk around your house, your yard, your neighborhood. Think about, is there anything that you take for granted that's just there? It's always there when you need it. What would you miss if it were gone tomorrow? So I'll ask you to go ahead and pause the video and take at least 5 minutes to just experience your space and contemplate those questions. All right, so before we move on, I just want to make a quick distinction between the jail setting and the prison setting. The jail setting is usually that first place that someone goes to when they are charged with a crime. So when someone is taken into custody, they usually go to a police station, but once the official charges are made, they go into booking and go into the jail setting. It's important to note that the charges are pending for the majority of the people that are in the jail. There's very few people who are working like a work release or even serving a sentence. The majority of the people are kind of waiting for their legal proceedings. So there's a variety of charges, a variety of situations, a variety of places in which people came from and have different living circumstances. There are several people that you may encounter if you go into the jail to offer services that may have come from living on the streets, and that's where they might be going when they get out. It is a very variable, a highly variable environment. So there's a lot of turnover. People are staying just for sometimes a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, sometimes a few months, even sometimes people are there for a year or more. Now, in the prison setting, one of the most significant distinctions is that people don't go to prison until they are sentenced. So ideally, they are found guilty of a charge and they have been sentenced to serve a certain amount of time. Usually sentences are longer than a year. If they're smaller sentences, they do have the options to serve their time at the local jails. But one thing to be aware of is that in the prison setting, there's oftentimes more opportunities for programming because there is a long amount of time that people have there. They can actually work on things like degrees or VOTEC skills and things like that. So there's opportunities for training and preparation in the prison setting that wouldn't likely work in the jail setting because of how short that period of time is that someone who's in jail would be serving. All right, the incarceration routine. So some of the things to consider: the meals are scheduled more around like what the staff needs to do, the scheduling of the staff. And that means that breakfast is at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I asked the women at the jail if that was still the case, and they assured me that that is. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, everybody's door pops, pop, 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 and they have to come down and grab their breakfast and bring it up to their room, or they don't get breakfast. So there's a kind of a throw you off of the schedule right there at the beginning of the day. Most people go back to sleep because the rest of the schedule is based off of more of a 9 to 5 kind of day. There are 30-minute checks. So this is in one of the populations or one of the housing units that we serve in the Boulder County Jail, where the supervising officers have to go around and account for everybody every 30 minutes. And how they do that is once they look at the room that the person is in and make sure everybody's okay, they have this big metal wand and they stick it to this metal plate in the door, and it's a big loud clank, and then it goes beep, and that is how they are documenting that they are making sure everyone is safe. But you can imagine now, 24 hours a day, every 30 minutes, this is going on. So maybe after a while, people habituate to it. However, think about when you're first in the situation, you're already in the shock of the situation, what your circumstances are, maybe a little nervous about the person that you're with, and then here's this 30-minute kind of jolt you out of wherever your brain is. So these are some of the things to think about when we're going in to serve in this population. Recreation. So this picture up at the top right of the screen is actually an outdoor recreation area at the Boulder County Jail. So the jail walls are all around, and the recreation area is kind of in the middle of it. It has a walking path, and there is a basketball court, and I think there's a volleyball net there. And the rec time, it's different, and it changes depending on how many people are in the jail, how many housing units they're utilizing. But currently, our participants at the Boulder County Jail get to go to an hour rec time once every other day. So that is generally the only opportunity they have to maybe get some fresh air, move around in space, feel the ground, feel nature, maybe hear birds. Some of the other things to consider, if the weather's not good for outdoor recreation time, there's an indoor gymnasium. And so that's more of just like an empty school gymnasium, really. It's just a room to walk around with basketball hoops. Sometimes there's equipment. There's no free weights, but maybe like some machines where people can do more calisthenic exercises. Some jails only have the gymnasium, and some jails have something more like a garage, and they just open up the garage door to let a little air in when it's being used for rec time. So once every 48 hours, an hour access to outside space or not. Also, it's not guaranteed. There are reasons why maybe they would cancel the rec, maybe staffing issues. Maybe sometimes the recreation is taken away as a punitive measure. So, there's times where somebody who is getting some kind of disciplinary action, maybe they got in an argument and they're on lockdown, they don't have access to that. So for the recreation time, we can see that it's not always a given, and it's not always something that is going to facilitate exercise. Potentially it might just be like, I want to sit on the grass. I want to feel the grass. So we can think about that when we are looking at creating yoga classes for our students, balancing out maybe a desire for activity against a lack of having activity and how that may affect the body and the ability to jump into more vigorous kinds of poses. This picture over on the left is a picture in one of the modules. So this is just kind of the meal time. Everybody grabs their trays. Then there is downtime and lockdown time. So it is important to note that depending on the guard, so not even just the standard of the jail, but sometimes it's the individual guard that's on duty who may have a policy that you aren't allowed to take any food from your tray for later. So, imagine that you get this tray of food and you're wanting to only eat a certain amount. Maybe there's a piece of something that you're like, oh, I would like to have this later on. I'm not that hungry now, but you don't have the luxury of doing that. So, taking that into consideration. And then the downtime and lockdown time. So depending on the module, there is either time where you're kind of in more of a isolation. I mean, think about when you were in trouble as a kid and you had to go to your room, right? Or maybe it's more of a situation where you kind of have to be with a whole group of people with nothing else to do. So there's different things depending on what module it is. TV is a big thing. We'll discuss more about the differences between the two modules in part 2. Talking to other people is another option. Eating. So, as I said, sometimes you're not allowed to save the food from your tray. Sometimes you are. If you have money that people give you from the outside that is on your books, and you can purchase foods from commissary so you can have some of those comforts. So that's something that some people utilize as a little bit of an escape. Sleep. That's something that a lot of people in the situation will choose to just kind of shut down and go to sleep. And that's a good consideration when you're thinking about the yoga classes that you're teaching, because you may be having someone who's like rubbing their eyes when they're coming into class. And so the attentiveness isn't going to be there right away. And you may want to structure the beginning of your class to accommodate that. Reading, there's usually access to books. The jail, at least Boulder County, does have a library. People donate books, and they do have a bit of a budget, so they have a librarian who will go out and look for books. Sometimes there's classes, so certain modules, depending on what type of jail you're working in and what kind of modules that they have. Some are barren and have nothing to offer except hopefully a yoga class, right? Or you may have a very program-heavy module, and there is one module that the Boulder County Jail has that is focused on transitioning a little bit more. A lot of the women in that module are kind of ending their sentence or potentially getting out soon, and so they offer a lot of classes to try to help give them support. So those can also be a possibility. All right, so one thing I really want to highlight is that in the jail setting, most people are awaiting trial or sentencing. So arrested for an offense does not mean found guilty. In a prison system, people are found guilty and sentenced to these long-term sentences in the prison. However, I say this so that you can contemplate the mindset here in the jail, because there's still, for some of the people, a thought that maybe I won't get in trouble. Sometimes it creates a desire to want to convince people, aka the yoga teacher who's coming in to teach the yoga class, that they didn't do it and that they shouldn't be in there, and can you help them? So I want also to kind of bring that thought in. We'll talk about some of these components later on, but again, keeping it in your mind. In the jail setting, there's still that, like, people don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes you have people in there who have never had any experience with the jail system, with the criminal justice system. And so the whole experience is overwhelming and confusing for them too. There are ranges of offenses. Misdemeanors, examples can be, more like petty thefts. Some misdemeanors can carry big sentences. Some felonies can have smaller sentences. So there's a whole range to felonies. In Colorado, it's a F1 is like the most severe, and it goes all the way down to an F6. What I really want to highlight is sometimes somebody can have a misdemeanor that's carrying just as much of a sentence as a felony. Of course, a felony has a bit more of a scarlet letter label that goes on somebody. There's also sentence enhancers. So sometimes one offense, like, they did this thing, but they had a weapon on their person. They didn't use the weapon, but they had the weapon. And so now, because they had the weapon, it's a sentence enhancer. And so now a 10-year possible sentence is going to be a 20-year sentence. Another thing is multiple charges for one offense. So one act can have several charges, and each of those charges could be several years. And so sometimes you could have people come into your yoga class who are looking at 48 years in prison if they're found guilty. It's not often that will be the result for these situations. It's just kind of how the whole system begins. And if you're somebody who hasn't had any experience with the criminal justice system, that can be overwhelming. You can feel like your life is over, right? And so one of the things that we really try to avoid is any discussions of somebody's specific situation. I'll give some examples of like verbiage that you can use to try to avoid this, because sometimes, as I said, someone in this situation may be feeling panicked to the point where they feel like they need to convince you why they shouldn't be in there. And we want to be able to avoid that. And we want to make them feel calm and safe to just participate and experience the yoga that we're there to offer. So oftentimes, wanting to have a check-in, wanting to get to know the names of the people who come to your class. Maybe you have a class of 4 people that show up to the yoga class. You want to know their names. You want to know how they're feeling. You want to know what's going on. Like, hey, is there any injuries I want to be aware of? All right, so if you're teaching in that jail setting, you may find that based off of the energy that comes into the room, it may be the best option to just jump into some of the movement, and you can gradually work your way into getting to know the names or soliciting that information about if there's any injuries or anything that doesn't feel right throughout the beginning of the class. However, there's many times where it really is beneficial to invite everyone to kind of share at least what their name is and maybe just check in with where they are. Now, one consideration about this is that sometimes there's a tendency for overshare or being a little too engrossed in kind of their situation and wanting to explain everything, which we really do want to avoid. We want to make sure that we have our boundaries around what that introduction should look like. So I usually have a pretty standard greeting and introduction for what I do when I teach the classes. And it's something like, I'd love to know everyone's name. If you could just tell me, what's your first name? And give me one word about how you feel. It could be tight, it could be anxious, it could be sleepy, it could be sad. So whatever really just helps identify what it is that you're feeling in your space today. All right, other considerations. So we kind of talked a little bit about the uncertainty of the jail situation. That sense of like no control, lack of control, and when it happens quick, it hits hard. The stress of the environment, potential injuries that people might have, drug addictions that they may be having to deal with, withdrawal symptoms, lack of sleep, like we said, those 30-minute check-ins. So, all of these things we chatted a little bit about. Other considerations, employment, housing, and children. Like in our women's population, this is a big one. Like a lot of times we're talking about maybe not necessarily single moms, but there are single moms. And so all of a sudden their child is with somebody else. They don't know if their housing is going to be there for them when they get out, if they get out. Their jobs, likely not able to have called their job. So hopefully they were able to call somebody who could call their job when they were arrested. But, that's not always the first thing on your mind. So now they're in this space and they have no idea if they still have a job, if they still have a home, or what's happening with their kids. As we said, possible injuries or drug withdrawals. So those are considerations that we want to have when we are leading the classes. We don't want to ask anybody outright, like, are you having drug, are you withdrawing? Sometimes they'll tell you. And it's good information to have, but we don't want to solicit it from them. So we want to have some ability to kind of scan the people who are there and showing up for the class. Mental health diagnoses is another thing. Usually the jail staff is pretty good about knowing if someone's going to be a disruption, and oftentimes they will step in and not allow someone to come, or they might tell you, hey, I have this person, I'm going to let them come, but know that this might be something you deal with. But I don't think they're not going to put anybody in there who's going to have a strong potential for doing something harmful. But know that a lot of the different diagnoses may require medications, and so throughout your class you may have somebody walk in and call out one of your students to get their medications. We talked about the 30-minute checks, interrupting sleep, no control over your environment. Like, you don't have any control over how much noise is going to be coming into your ears at any given time. You don't have any control over the temperature of the space, and sometimes that can be pretty extreme, depending on what the facility's capabilities are. And diet, we kind of looked at the food trays. I think there is a standard there. I think there has to be, right? I would hope. But there's nothing about quality assurance, or as far as like, like, oh yes, we have to make sure they have this wonderful flavor, or, like they get beans a lot. And so taking into consideration that a lot of people's digestion is not at its peak when they're coming into the class, preoccupied with the legal situation. So people may be inside their head, they may perseverate, they may not be in a headspace to follow along with all of the things that you're doing. They may do their own thing. They may sit down and hit a child's pose or something like that. So it's an important thing to make sure that you give them that permission and maybe offer them a specific, like, hey, if what we're doing doesn't feel right, you need to take your own space. You're always welcome to come here, child's pose. Level of education. I think that in some areas it may be a little bit more drawn in a lower level of education. However, I have found that in the Boulder County Jail, it's a wide range of education. So just knowing that you are going to potentially have some participants that would appreciate more elementary talk rather than some of our like energetic yogi cues that we can use sometimes. Stress. So this is a really interesting piece of research. I know I said research was going to come in part 3, but I just want to bring this up. Research says that the anticipation of punishment is much more stress-inducing than the actual punishment itself. So I want to just say that statement because it's important to consider that when you are looking at the jail population who hasn't been sentenced yet. And as I said, the kind of theme that you'll see is that somebody who may end up getting a year probation may be sitting in jail with charges that could add up to 20 years in prison. And so there's that uncertainty and this like not knowing and anticipation of it. So just thinking about that kind of brain dynamic, that thought process that's going through people, and the fact that not knowing is going to produce much more stress than once somebody knows, okay, this is what I have to deal with. Once we know what we have to deal with, we're all pretty good about, okay, I guess I got to deal with this, right? Another thing is this sense, and not everybody shows up feeling this way, but there's usually a sprinkle of people who come into the yoga class feeling like, I don't know how to do yoga, and I don't think I belong in a yoga class. So we're going to take a look at that mindset about yoga that you may experience, and what are some of the things that we can do to kind of help alleviate that from the get-go. All right, so even just in that introduction, like letting people know, like, hey, this yoga is not about being a pretzel, right? So like, how can we like put it together in a quick sentence or two that lets people feel like, oh, I don't have to stand on my head today. So let's just take a look at what that accessible yoga description might look like. Well, one way that I like to explain it to everyone is you may have seen pictures of people twisted up like pretzels or standing on their head. That's not what we're going to do here today. we're doing the yoga that is all about connecting to where we are, right here, this space, this time together, and connecting with what's happening inside. You guys ready? So this is just a great way to let them know, like, it doesn't have to be any physically challenging thing, something that's accessible to them. All right, relatable stories, having fun. I find that being a little silly sometimes and kind of laughing at myself really breaks the ice, and it takes away the hesitancy that some of the students may have about trying something out. So let's kind of take a look at what one of those situations might look like. All right, relatable stories. These could be things that help maybe in the moment of a challenging position. So maybe we're working on a pose and everybody's having some trouble, and you can bring up your own kind of story or experience with your first time in the pose, or maybe your breakthrough moment in a pose. It can also be, relatable about just the experience of yoga in itself. I know sometimes I've said to people that, like with meditation, where I say, the first time somebody told me, meditation was like about clearing your mind, I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to do that. And usually everybody's like, I don't know, right? And then we start to bring in the concepts about, it's not about that as much as it is about stepping away and not going down the rabbit hole with what comes up, just watching and going, oh, look at that thought, there goes that thought. And that can make a lot of sense. And then people go, I could do that. So make it relatable in a way that they feel that it is accessible. All right, you can use your own introduction to empower your students. So, maybe your own journey, maybe you didn't start your first class in jail, right? But many of us found yoga out of some kind of struggle. And struggle is relatable to all of us. So maybe thinking about how to put your introduction, here's how I was introduced to yoga, and how that might become an invitation for your students to feel like, okay, maybe I can try this too. Just a little alert, this is going to be one of your questions for the quiz, is kind of writing your own introduction that you feel might help empower your students. Let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, relatable stories. So remember, we have asked that everyone kind of keep their introduction to a few words. So when we're introducing yoga or our relatable story, we want to make sure that we're honoring that too. So we don't need to go down our own rabbit holes either. We don't need to give our whole life history or storyline behind finding yoga. It could be something as simple as, I found yoga, or should I say, yoga found me when I was in one of the darkest times of my own life. And it really helped me find my breath and find a sense of being connected and being able to move forward. So I'd love to share that with you all today. All right, so that is the end of our part 1. Just to give you a sneak peek of part 2. So coming up next, we're going to look at the population. We're going to look at the demographics, the trauma measurements, stress and depression. So what does the research say that the population that finds themselves incarcerated look like? We'll look at the housing units. So we're going to take a look at, I like to say there's 2 housing units in Boulder County Jail for the women's population, and I call one overstimulation and the other one isolation. So we're going to take a look at what those specific differences are. And then we'll also explore how does that affect the tone of the class. All right, so for this part 1, CEC, in order to get the credit, you'll complete the homework assignment. That's simply clicking into the email quiz link and answer the 2 reflection questions to receive your certificate. So first question is going to be, what would you miss in your life if you found yourself in jail? So just considering, like, if it was gone tomorrow, what would I really miss? And then the second one is what your relatable introduction would be. So I enjoyed creating this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Sending that out, I will send your certificate to you via email. You can use the Yoga Alliance website to upload the certificate and get your CEC. If you would like to know a little bit more about the program that we run in Boulder County Jail, it is actually a re-entry program, so we have a whole community component to it as well. You can visit allaroundyoga.com/programs to see more about what we do. Thank you.